do I find out if my son of 10 years old has viewed porn without putting it in his mind to become inquisitive about the topic?
Oh, man, you don't have to put it in kids' minds to be inquisitive about sex or about bodies in general. That kids are naturally curious and inquisitive, and I guarantee you that he's already curious about his body, about the opposite sex bodies. That's not something you plant in them. It's something God planted in us,
Mm.
that we have that curiosity about our own body and about the opposite gender's body.
I
And
love that.
so,
I love that God planted that in us.
totally, yeah, no one has to teach us that.
Mm.
Instead, what we want to think about as parents is, how do we steward that curiosity? Right? How do we acknowledge it and affirm it as a good thing and a natural thing and part of how God has made us? And how do we steward it in such a way that we help kiddos make wise choices and avoid destructive kind of pitfalls that curiosity can lead them into inadvertently? And so the 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 goal is not as much to like discover whether or not the 10-year-old has viewed porn, and there's an end goal that's after that. So what if we know the answer to that? Yes, kiddo's been exposed to porn in some way. Then what? Right? Knowing that's just a means to an end, it's not an end in and of itself. That what we're really wanting to do is steward the kiddo in terms of managing their sexuality and stewarding that curiosity in a way that will be constructive, helpful, beneficial to them, as opposed to destructive and damaging. And so we can achieve that simply by engaging the dialogue and the conversation. Be the leader in that. Lead the way in encouraging the conversation, affirming the curiosity, being the source of information for them about their body, about bodies in general, so they don't have to, rely on the locker room at school to infill those gaps, because we know what a fountain of, information and truth the locker room is, right? But give them the opportunity to feel competent and not shamed and ashamed of their curiosity about those things, and to be able to talk about what pornography is, talk about how it distorts God's design for love, for relationship, for sex, for bodies, why it's to be avoided, the damage that can come from it, why you want to know kind of what experiences or exposures that they might have had, so that you can be helpful in protecting them from the damage that can come from that. Those are the kinds of conversations and the direction that you want to go with that.
Yeah, yeah, I really like that you mentioned in that conversation talking about why it's damaging. Not just talking
Mhm.
about what it is, but why it's damaging. Really, talking to your 10-year-old, as, a growing into a man, this is
Mhm.
why it could hurt you. This is why it's
Mhm.
damaging, and not babying it, because it is dangerous and because it
Mhm.
is very painful, in many
Totally.
marriages.
Totally. Yeah. And so it's not a subject that we have to be scared of, but it is one that we need to take seriously. And we can just have candid conversations about it. Like, the enemy likes to fill vacuums, knowledge vacuums. That if you, as a parent, if we as parents don't speak to these areas, then that vacuum that we've created through silence, the enemy will fill with all sorts of distorted stuff. And so we want to fill that with truth, as opposed to leaving a vacuum for lies to infill.
Right, and how important it is, obviously not when you're so young, but how important is it when you're, 10 years old, when you're young and you're just starting to kind of eyes open to that, to
Hmm.
create that environment with your kids, to have that relationship with your parent where you feel like you can say, "Hey, I saw this and this is how it made me feel."
Hmm. Yeah, totally. You want to create the context where they can have that. And that doesn't like start at 10. Sometimes people want to know, when do I have the sex talk, with my kids? And there shouldn't be a sex talk. Like, it's not a singular kind of talk that happens point in time, but instead an ongoing discussion and dialogue around our bodies and sexuality and God's design at age appropriate levels all along the way. And we start teaching our kids about their body as infants before they're even verbal, as we're bathing them and we're caring for their body and we're teaching them language for thinking about and understanding their own body. And we're affirming their body as a good thing and a positive thing. That those attitudes, mindsets, language, our affirmation around just their body is a beginning place for a healthy sexual theology and a healthy understanding about the embodiment that God has made us as embodied creatures, right? That God created creatures that aren't embodied in flesh, and that us, He made and embodied us and said it was good. And we want to carry that message forward from cradle to grave around our bodies and our sexual experience.
For sure. Yeah. And, I don't have any kids yet, but of course, this is a conversation that even my husband and I have had conversations about of just, hey, how do you want to address this someday when we do
Mhm.
have kids, when we are in that situation? Do you want to, do this? Do you want to say this? How do you want to have those conversations and kind of open up the floor from the
Mhm.
start for that to be an open conversation, and I think that that's so important, even just for parents to talk about, to already kind of have an idea of, before they reach 16, 17 years old, how to address these issues and how to talk about it with them.
Totally. And there's never a point where it's too late, right? There's never a point that it's too early, that there's age appropriate ways to talk about bodies and sexuality from, again, from infancy kind of all the way through adulthood. And so there's not an too early time. But sometimes parents can have teenagers, later teenagers, and they're just now starting to maybe hear a talk like this, where they're going, oh man, I haven't really been proactive about that with my son or my daughter. Is it really too late? They're 15, 16, 17. They probably already know everything that there is to know. And, is there really any point? It'd probably just be awkward for them and uncomfortable for them. And all these kind of fears and reasons and shame can come in the picture to try to shut down that conversation. But I'm telling you, it's never too late to have that conversation. You can start it with just a real candid ownership of, hey, I need to be having this conversation with you sooner. And I'm sorry that I haven't, but I'm recognizing I'm maybe feeling convicted around that, maybe realizing that I haven't done you any favors by leaving a void and silence around this. And so, yeah, this is probably, at least as awkward for you as it is for me to bring this up. But I think it's really important because this is an important part of life, an important part of relationship. And so I want to share with you my understanding of what this is about, what sex is about from our creator's perspective, and have be able to have a dialogue about that so that we can talk about these things.
Yeah, and what a great way to just start that conversation by, acknowledging this is what I've experienced, this is where I've failed, just kind of like not putting it all on this is what you need to do, you, but also like just relating to them, to come to their level and talk to them as if you're having a conversation with, a friend or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and talk about what it is and what it's supposed to be, as
Mhm.
opposed to what it's not. Right? A lot of times the conversations are, here's the sex talk. Don't until you're married, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask me.
Mhm.
The end. Right? Which is severely lacking. And
And it's what a
that
lot of us probably experienced growing up.
totally,
Yeah.
totally. Right? And so if you've ever had your parent and to say, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Oh, Jesus, please don't ask me. And that, how awkward and uncomfortable is that, right? Like that doesn't actually give permission and create a safe space for having those conversations. Just saying, if you have any questions, you have grown up as a parent. You have lived through these ages. You don't have to uh, leave it up to them to come up with the questions. You can fill in the gaps just based on your own knowledge and experience of what's happened in life, which really helps to facilitate the conversation.
That's great. I feel like I should be writing things down as we're talking, just like in a book to get out when I have a baby someday, just to remember, because just really solid advice. And I just think very God honoring in the way that you talk about sex and God's design of it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we struggle with. It's hard. It's a hard subject. The enemy has intentionally attacked it, both outside of the church and inside of the church. And so there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of kind of misconception about it. And particularly in church cultures, at times, there's a sense that we can't talk about sex or that we shouldn't talk about sex. But in reality, sex is God's idea. It's a good idea. Anybody ought to be talking about it. It ought to be God's people. And so it's really, this is the right place for us to be having these discussions.